the view, in the light of all the circumstances of the case, that the state has not proved its case beyond reasonable doubt.
Quiet, please.
The accused are found not guilty and are discharged on all the charges.
Well, I'm disappointed because social workers can't do their jobs if the National Prosecuting Authority doesn't do its job. The real party on trial today was the NPA. Now, unfortunately, people don't understand the distinction between found not guilty and being innocent. He was found not guilty because the failure of the prosecution to cross-examine, I mean, that's the one key thing about the criminal justice system is cross-examination. He just totally didn't even try. And the judge said as much. So I think that people...
If one has regard to the seriousness of the charges, the extent and the complexity of the charges, resultantly, the following order shall issue. 1. The application to have the matter struck from the roll due to unreasonable delay be and is hereby refused. 2. The application by the state to have the matter postponed in order to obtain the repercussions certificate be and is hereby granted. 3. The state is granted a period of 3 weeks from the date of this order within which to obtain the said certificate. 4. This is a final demand for the state to obtain the said certificate. I hand down the judgment.
Well, what does Judge Irma Skuman's acquittal of a sexual predator last Wednesday have to do with Magistrate Mhlanga Bala giving the NPA more time to certify charges against 17 people for racketeering? Well, it's because the lead prosecutor in both cases is Advocate Nceba Ntelwa. Unsurprisingly, he was not in the Alice Magistrates Court on Friday. Given the huge public outrage against him for having botched the Omotoso trial, I assume that he was in an undisclosed location somewhere in hiding. Now, some background to how I became involved. My work as a social worker is to provide support to an extraordinarily brave remnant of individuals I call witness bearers. A more inclusive term than simply whistleblowers, they are people who experience retaliation for speaking truth to power, sometimes within power, and also about power. And how power tends, because it doesn't have the truth, seeks to suppress it. Now, in June last year, one of the whistleblowers that I work with, Mzu Makatse, who was one of the lottery's whistleblowers, he lives in East London, and he alerted me to the trauma that a forensic investigator, Sarah Berger, was going through after having been arrested and allegedly been part of a criminal syndicate that was supposedly defrauding the University of Fort Hare. She had reached out to Mzu and also other whistleblowers, Patricia Mashale, and Sarah was not what we understand to be a typical whistleblower. She was just doing her job, contracted by Professor Buhlungu, the Vice-Chancellor, to help trace evidence of corruption and fraud. And she was doing a very good job, even to the point where she had found evidence indicating that the Premier of the Eastern Cape, Oscar Maboyani, had, with a Professor Ijioma, been involved in faking his academic record. Now, all of that is covered in an interview I did with Sarah 4 months ago. If you just click on the link appearing above now, you'll get the chapter and verse of that. So for the past 9 months, I have been providing advocacy support to her and, as it turns out, other accused. I can't talk about them for professional reasons at this stage, but it has given me a very privileged insight into what is going on around this Fort Hare corruption saga. Now, on Friday, the 28th of March, I got a call from Sarah asking me to please come down to support her and others. In the 4th court appearance in the past 12 months, I had been there on the 12th of September last year when the trial was set to commence, but it wasn't able to proceed because Advocate Ntelwa had not yet got a racketeering certification, and he was given another 6 months to obtain it. Just to explain, racketeering is a relative recent innovation in our criminal procedures, which is a high reward because you can pull together a whole bunch of accused in one prosecution, the kingpins and the pawns, but is also high risk and vulnerable to abuse. And that's why the power to certify such prosecution rests with the National Director of Public Prosecutions, which brings us to Monday, the 31st of March. I was there in the Alice Magistrates Court to hear Advocate Ntelwa again mislead the court, in my opinion, in trying to explain why he had not yet received the racketeering certification from Advocate Nceba Ntelwa, and he had asked for an extension for 3 weeks. The lawyers representing the accused applied for the case to be struck off the roll for unreasonable delay, which was causing severe prejudice to the accused. And I heard them basically enumerating in court the sort of things which had been shared with me by Sarah and the other accused of just how devastating this has been on their personal well-being and their lifestyles and all the rest, particularly since they have not done a proper investigation before they proceeded to that arrest. Well, things started looking up because fortunately I happened to meet up with ENCA reporter Ronald Masinda. And coincidentally, we had previously interviewed me for comment after the murder of Pam Mabini in January. Now, she was the gender activist who had been supporting the complainants in the Omotoso matter, and Ronald suggested I monitor the Omotoso Day of Judgment, and I'm very pleased I did, even though, as you can see in the clip, my blood pressure was shooting up. Now, up front, I think it's probably a good idea, in the interest of full disclosure, to let me just explain that my upset at being at the Omotoso trial was because I'd been sitting in court in very close proximity to him when I heard the guilty verdict. And I now realize it triggered something of the trauma I experienced in March 2016 after the murder of my friend Bazuka Hadebe. Now, those of you who've been following the Kolobeni mineral sands thing, he was the chair of the Amadiba Crisis Committee, which had stopped that Kolobeni mining scheme on the Wild Coast. Now, 9 years have elapsed since Bazuka's murder, and we have still not had an arrest or prosecution. Why not? Well, check out this report from Amambungani. It tries to explain, it's from, 3 years ago. It recalls the obstructiveness of the Eastern Cape DPP, Advocate Barry Madolo. So that explains why my skin, or more precisely my soul, is in this game. And in this film, that I want to bear something of that soul and take people into my confidence and invite you, those of you who share my concern, to try and find a redemptive path through what I believe is a critical crisis in South Africa's democracy. Not just a crisis for the NPA, but for the future of this democracy, because if we want peace, we must work for justice. I remember that as a slogan that we used to use as bumper stickers during the evil days of apartheid. And another one said, "For those who make justice impossible, make violence inevitable." So with those thoughts racing through my mind, I circled back to the Alice Magistrates Court on Friday last week to hear the ruling of Magistrate Bala. After he gave a further extension of 3 weeks, interestingly, the attorney who represents the largest subset of the 17 accused, Mr. Henry van Breda, informed the court that the day after the adjournment, Monday, it was day after Tuesday, all of the accused had been further, he used the polite term prejudiced, but it was intimidated when an order was given restraining all their assets and basically taking control of their bank accounts. Now, that really seemed to be like another kick of a dying horse, an act of retaliation to try and further intimidate people. So at the end of a very tumultuous week, before heading back to Johannesburg, I asked Mr. van Breda outside the court to try and help me understand what was going on. Mr. van Breda, thank you so much. You gave an astonishingly good performance in court, but we weren't able to record it. Can you just briefly sum up what the status of affairs now with this case?
Presently, what happened today now is the magistrate did not agree with us in order to dismiss the case in terms of Section 342 capital A, where we asked the court to find that there is a delay and furthermore to find that the delay was unreasonable. And once the court has found that the delay is unreasonable, then the court can invoke the provisions of Section 342A subsection 3C, whereby the court has a lot of options, but one that we ask for is for the case to be struck off the roll and not be placed back on the roll without the written consent of the Director of Public Prosecutions. So the court has found that there is indeed a delay, but found that the delay is not unreasonable. And in light thereof, the court granted a further postponement for 3 weeks to 25 April for the state to obtain a racketeering certificate. And that remand is made a final remand, so which we trust if the certificate is not available on 25 April, that the matter will indeed be struck from the roll.
Now, 3 weeks is not a long time. The magistrate did acknowledge that financial crimes are complex and this is notoriously difficult, and that he exercised a certain amount of judicial caution not to prejudice this whole case. Do you think we're going to be ready in 3 weeks' time, given the complexity of this case?
One must just backtrack a little bit and to state that the state had already 6 months in order to obtain the certificate. So it will be basically 6 months and 4 weeks that they have in order to obtain the certificate, because a week has already lapsed and the magistrate has granted them now another 3 weeks. From experience, it takes a considerable period in time to obtain those certificates. Whether they're going to have it or not, it's not for me to say. So we'll have to wait and see on the 25th whether they will be able to produce a certificate.
Yeah, but now what's happened since Monday and today is we've had the Timothy Omotoso acquittal.
Yes.
Now, everything needs to be put in the context, and I know it's not fair to play the man rather than play the ball, and you as a good lawyer are the sort of person that would want to have decorum about it, but the public is absolutely outraged that the lead prosecutor in that case, he was removed by Judge Skuman 2 years ago, is in fact the lead prosecutor in this case.
The cross-examination of the accused was desultory in the extreme. No thought went into it. The trial was set down for 9 days to deal with the evidence of the defense. Accused 1 testified for a whole day, setting out his defense, but the cross-examination of accused 1 lasted less than a morning session. He was not cross-examined on his denial with reference to the complainant's testimonies. No attempt was made to elicit inconsistencies or improbabilities. His cross-examination consisted mainly of putting a very limited synopsis of the respected complainant's evidence to him, which evidence the accused denied, then putting it to him that what they testified about is correct. It is not that there had been little scope for cross-examination. There was ample evidence that the veracity of his evidence could have been tested against. The cross-examination was shallow and lacking the intention to uncover the truth. Similarly ineffectual and superficial was the cross-examination of accused 2 and 3 that amounted to no cross-examination at all.
Now, the question has to be asked, given the added complexity of a racketeering charge, do we have any reasonable hope to expect that they're going to be able to, not even ready in 3 weeks' time, but ever be ready to proceed with this sort of case? And will it not lead to another gross miscarriage of justice?
It's very difficult for me to say and to answer that question, but I want to come back to what we always say. Commercial crime matters are sometimes very complex, and that is why even the National Commissioner of Police has issued an instruction already in 2019 that cases must first be investigated properly before they effect an arrest.
These 6 guys came running up the stairs, led by a constable, and I recognized the constable because she's known to me. And she said, "Oh, just the person I'm here to see. I'm here to arrest you." So I said, "On what basis? I've done nothing wrong." And she said, "Let's go and talk inside your office." She pointed to my door and she said, "You're a director of this business?" I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Well, then I'm going to be placing you under arrest and flying you to the Eastern Cape." And
what did she say they were arresting you for? What were they accusing you of?
They put a 1-pager down on the table and they pointed at it, and it said that I'd been accused of corruption in around 2020. So I just saw this and I mean, my heart sank because I just thought, I just kept on saying to her, I've done nothing wrong. I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you not going after the people that I've investigated where the real evidence is available?
An arrest. And my personal opinion is that they should have done the investigation properly prior to arresting these people. But to go and arrest them on a Thursday afternoon of Easter weekend was, with the greatest respect, totally uncalled for. And just the whole manner in which this case was driven is unacceptable from my point of view.
What advice do you have to social workers like me who are schooled to not be judgmental, not to pass judgment, to respect the courts when there is justice doesn't just get delayed and denied, it gets compounded by the endless failures of the prosecuting authority, as we saw in the Omotoso case, as I've seen in the Senzo Mayiwa case, which I've been monitoring. I mean, there's just so many stories, and there's a sense in which the NPA is being delegitimized in the minds of the public, because then people will feel they can take the law into their own hands, and then we'll see the steady erosion of the rule of law.
No, I hear what you are saying. Every case must be dealt with on its own merits, and I mean there are concerns about the prosecuting authority, and I hear what you say about the Omotoso case. So difficult for me to comment on that. But yes, unfortunately, it happens that people do take the law into their own hands. That sometimes happens, which is not correct. We cannot approve that at all. Yes, that is why I believe we have a good justice system, but it must be applied accurately and correctly. I don't think there's anything wrong with our justice system. Yes.
One concern is that the good prosecutors in the NPA leave, and the ones which are not very competent are impossible to get rid of. The competence levels of the NPA are just in steady decline. And I mean, my sense is in the Omotoso case that, Judge Skuman actually tried to preemptively save the prosecution from itself in the Omotoso trial by actually having Advocate Ntelwa removed from that case. And alas, it wasn't enough. On the balance of probabilities, it's obvious that he was guilty, but obviously now they couldn't reach that threshold. So one has this terrible sense that people just are losing faith and losing hope. So anyway, I'm just ventilating my own anxiety, and I'm just saying...
And frustrations.
And frustration. This is probably therapy for me, just to be able to say thank you very much for your very strong and articulate advocacy on behalf of the accused here. And I really just hope that justice will be done.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yes, we all hope that justice will be done.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
While I can understand why Mr. van Breda has expressed confidence in the criminal justice system, I mean, he's an officer of the court, he needs to actually express a measure of optimism and hope for his clients. I'm not an officer of the court. I'm a justice and peace monitor, and I want to, in the second part, just to reflect on this whole saga that I experienced last week, and really to try and explore why, after 5 years of working with witness bearers, whistleblowers, I don't share his confidence. The Omotoso trial is over. The Fort Hare Racketeering trial has not yet started. But before I get to the latter, let's reflect a bit more on the former. Now, Advocate Ntelwa and his superiors have so manifestly failed in the most basic requirements of a credible prosecutor. Now, that he is incompetent and prone to perjury is not my judgment. It is Judge Skuman's judgment. First, in a judgment she handed down in December 2021, in which she ruled against the application for a mistrial, but said this, insisting that Advocate Ntelwa be removed from the prosecution. I quote, "With regard to the conduct of Mr. Ntelwa, I am satisfied that it would not be appropriate that he should continue with the prosecution of the case. I would find it difficult to rely on his assurances on this matter. He might have encouraged witnesses not to deviate from their plea statement, even if the statements might not have been taken down with sufficient care and therefore not reflect the true state of affairs. Although there has been no application from the defence for Mr. Ntelwa to be replaced, that's significant, in spite of the fact that it became obvious prior to the judgment on Section 186 of the Criminal Procedures Act that he did not properly fulfill his duties, I am of the view that it would not be in the interests of justice and the accused's right to a fair trial that he remains a prosecutor in this case. Now, there is a link to that judgment in the description box below, well worth reading. Now, I think that her removal of Advocate Ntelwa 3 years ago, or attempted removal, was a preemptive move to try and rescue the NPA from itself. Well, he was removed for a while, but alas, he was then brought back after one of the witnesses, Cheryl Zondi, petitioned the NDPP, Shamila Batoy. Astonishingly, he was given a second chance. Now, there's no judgment implied on Cheryl Zondi's experience. She's explained herself in the media as saying, look, she's just a woman trying to kind of get justice. She doesn't understand all the complexity, so this isn't an attack on her. But I just can't imagine what Judge Schoeman must have felt when Advocate Ntelwa turned up again. And this is what she said 3 years later in the judgment which was handed down last week.
That Mr. Ntelwa rejoined the prosecuting team. This was done while Mr. Ntelwa's superiors knew of the suggestion he made that the witnesses should be persuaded to stick to their police statements and thereby commit perjury. During the trial, Mr. Ntelwa, while one of the witnesses were being cross-examined during an adjournment, went into the witness room and spoke to the witness. He claimed that it was to comfort her. As he was an officer of court, such assurance was accepted. However, due to the lie he later told in court that I will refer to, I'm not sure that it was in fact innocent. If he did.
Now, the SABC has uploaded onto YouTube a recording of the judgment, which you can watch at the link now appearing above. Judge Schoeman covers the issue of how Advocate Ntelwa didn't even understand what the law defines as rape, how he formed a WhatsApp group of all the witnesses in a gross violation of well-established procedures of how to deal with witnesses in a live trial. And she explains why, despite her subjective feeling that Mr. Omotoso and his co-accused were guilty, that he had not received a fair trial and therefore had to find him not guilty. Now, the only words that I can try to find to express how I felt about that outrage are from the prophet Habakkuk. Well, he's known as one of the minor prophets, but he has had a major influence on me since I started out as a social worker over 4 decades ago in shaping my understanding. He says, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted." The law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. Well, I know that one should never ascribe to malice that which can be adequately explained by incompetence. But the actions by the police and the prosecutions in the Fort Hare corruption saga are so bizarre that I have to assume malice. And it seems to me that that prosecution on racketeering is headed for a collapse which I think is being cleverly orchestrated by the criminal syndicates that are so paralyzing justice, not only in the Eastern Cape, but all over this country, with bad actors in both the police and the prosecution aiding and abetting them. So the theory I am putting out there for your comments and helping me to try and fathom this extraordinary situation is that there's something deeply rotten in the state of the Eastern Cape NPA in particular, and that they are deliberately engaging in prosecutorial overreach. I think there is a slow poison that is paralyzing the law and the rule of law so that justice will never prevail. And here's why I think it. 5 reasons. Firstly, the police have arrested before investigating, as Mr. Van Breda explains, violating the human rights of everybody concerned, even if they turn out one day to be guilty, some of them. That heavy-handedness in the way in which the police swooped on the accused, it's straight out of the Becky Kele copybook. There are police officers within the SAPs who have spoken to me in the past, and I know there are men and women of utmost dedication and integrity, and they are appalled by it too. Even at court on Friday, 2 of the captains from the Hawks who had arrived, I saw them speaking to Sarah Berger, where they were apparently seeking to get her help and urging her to continue to assist them in the particular cases that they've got against some of the other accused in the group. I mean, how bizarre can that be? The second reason why I think there's some deliberate sabotage here is that I believe the police deliberately swept some innocent people into the net because it would turbocharge the energy within the group as a whole to fight against the injustice. I mean, when you're innocent, you've got even more motive. If you know that deep in your heart of hearts you're guilty, well, you know, if you've done the crime, do the time. But if people are genuinely innocent, they will then fight like crazy to be set free. And what will then happen? The net will be broken and the real villains will also escape. Thirdly, Mr. Ntelwa is now going for a racketeering prosecution and is going to have to prove common cause and purpose among all the accused, which they can't, at least not amongst all the 17 people that are accused, from what my privileged insight is in speaking to some of them. Fourthly, Sarah and the other innocents who stand accused have been swept up into this net to stop them from testifying against the true villains. The innocents are being kept in so as to be discredited and constrained. Fifthly, and this is the unkindest cut of all, by freezing the bank accounts of the real innocents, they are being further intimidated and constrained.
Well, my colleague Christine has been following the story of the Fort Hare duo, as we've been calling them, 2 lawyers who were brought into Fort Hare to investigate corruption and then found themselves being the people who were targeted. We're going to find out from Bradley Conradi and Sarah Berger what the heck happened this morning. What happened today, Bradley? What exactly occurred at your home today?
Well, what happened today is that a curator arrived at my house at 7 a.m. this morning to serve a court order on me in which they restraining my assets as well as all of the other accused in the case. I've got no issue with the curator. He did his job, very professional, very amicable, no problem at all. What I have a big problem with is it's public knowledge that we have called out the police for their behavior in this matter. A year ago, they sent SWAT teams to my office, to Sarah's office, with their balaclavas and R5 rifles, put us on a jet, etc. We've reported them to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Police, and they've acknowledged the receipt. The police are aware of this, those that are involved in this case. And what do we get this morning? At 7 o'clock, between, from what I'm told by my family, 16 and 20 police officers in 7 cars arrive at my house in front of my children to serve a court order that doesn't require any policing whatsoever. I raised the question, I think it was last week or the week before, where are the police when serious crimes are taking place? They're nowhere to be found. But yet, once again, it was on the instruction of the police, whoever that is, and the people we are calling out includes the police commissioner, the head of crime intelligence, and the former police minister.
Well, if you want to watch the video, the link that is now appearing above will give you access to that. Now, one of my friends who saw it said, "Hi, John, I've watched the BizNews interview of Bradley Conradi and Sarah Berger, and I was really sickened by the way they are being treated by the state. They are whistleblowers par excellence. Are they receiving any support? I can't believe that the asset forfeiture unit is actually working on attaching their assets." Another of my friends, who happens to be a seasoned advocate, said this: "I listened to the BizNews interview of Conradi and Berger. This seems to me to be one of the worst cases of scapegoating I have ever heard of. I can only admire how brave they are to refuse to be intimidated by the system that does not seem to have a case against them. If they did, they would probably have brought it before a judge long ago. I hope and pray that they are vindicated soon and get their lives back, and that those responsible are held accountable. Do you need supernatural support?" I replied, "I am thinking that this is more than mere scapegoating. Scapegoating happens at an unconscious level. We all do it, we're not even aware of it. But when we become conscious of doing so, we blush, and our God-given goodness kicks in, and we beat our breasts and repent. I think there is something particularly diabolical in this retaliation because it's conscious and calculated. So yes, we do need supernatural support." This is death by 1,000 cuts. And I'm reminded of that Taylor Swift song by that title. She sings, "I get drunk, but it's not enough, 'cause I can't pretend it's okay when it's not. No, it's not." Well, that expresses well how Sarah and other innocents in that net feel. Well, why don't we just let it happen? Interestingly, on Monday, when the defense brought an application to have the matter struck off the roll for unreasonable delay, Magistrate Bala joked in court asking, why did they want that? Why don't you just give the state a longer rope to hang itself? They were only asking for 3 weeks more. Well, one of the defense lawyers said there was no more rope. Others expressed the fact that they couldn't imagine how Advocate Ntelwa could possibly remedy what he needs to do within 3 weeks. My concern was that the rope is funded by the public purse in its length. OUTA, the organisation undoing tax abuse, is now monitoring this case carefully for that very reason, and have also interviewed Sarah 4 months ago. Napoleon famously said, "Never interrupt your enemy while he is making a mistake." So why am I devoting so much time to challenging this injustice? Well, besides the fact that I'm not Napoleon, I don't see the NPA as our enemy. Going back a bit, after Bazooka's murder 9 years ago, in desperation, I went and spoke to the late Colonel Frank Dutton, who had served as the head of the Scorpions before the ANC disbanded it at the Polokwane conference. He told me not to hope for justice for Bazooka, given the state of the criminal justice system after that decision, and to rather pursue a civil litigation strategy. Well, sadly, Frank has since died, otherwise I would be seeking him out for more advice. What I think he would say is that civil society must now mobilize at every point to use civil litigation strategies to force the change, to hold the feet of the state to the fire. For starters, that could mean an O.J. Simpson type of civil suit against Timothy Omotoso and his co-accused. I don't know how we're going to get to the bottom of who killed Pam Mabini and stop the bad actors in the Eastern Cape, NPA and SAPS and elsewhere. I will leave it up to those who are listening to this to contribute your ideas. Civil society has got to take responsibility for the state. Human rights belong to us, not to the government. We've got to use them. The Constitution gives us that protection. Well, for me, I'm going to be talking with the Legal Resources Centre and others on getting some form of judicial intervention. The executive and legislative arms of government just seem to be so caught up and weak and contaminated by what I call the thugocratic machine that they are not going to do it without a lot of goading and encouragement from the judiciary and civil society and the media. Well, to conclude, let me try to offer some hope by moving from frenetic action to some spiritual contemplation. And I offer this appropriately as those of us who are Christians enter into Holy Week. Very important, solemn time. Now, whenever one of my whistleblower friends, Musila Motepu, phones me, she greets me affectionately as John the Baptist. And I always reply, Musila, John the Baptist lost his head. Does that mean I'm going to lose mine too? But recently, Richard Raw, the Franciscan priest and founder of the Center for Action and Contemplation, who has for the past 40 years been an absolutely vital inspiration to me, has been helping me keep my activism integrated into my contemplativism, which is the only reason why I am still going. And I would really say there is no ways we're going to kind of pull ourselves through the crisis that we're in this country and the globe and the world if we don't somehow regain a sense of divine providence. And in his latest book, The Tears of Things, Prophetic Wisdom for an Age of Outrage, Richard Raw has completely upended my understanding of the Hebrew prophets, as well as the New Testament prophets like John the Baptist. He categorizes John the Baptist together with Elijah, Jonah, and perhaps a few others as unfinished prophets. And he says, to quote, "My major thesis in this book is that most prophets invariably start with legitimate but righteously dualistic anger at the sins and injustices in the world. As they pursue their calling to teach what they think is God's truth, they confront confusion, denial, doubt, love, and most especially epiphany. Maturing prophets let these experiences change them, allowing themselves to evolve into non-dual and compassionate truth-tellers. But not all of the prophets we read about in the Bible mature in this way. It's what I call unfinished prophets. They don't evolve and mature, but persist in anger, blaming, and accusations. They remain moralistic and judgmental, but without the non-dual mysticism that characterizes a mature prophet. One of these unfinished prophets, John the Baptizer, may surprise you, but I hope you will be able to eventually see why. As Jesus says, the least in the kingdom of God is greater than he is. John's purity code moralism is a common substitute for the mysticism we see in Jesus, a pattern that endures in many, if not most, churches to this day. His baptism is mere water, a simple outer purification, whereas Jesus' baptism is fire and spirit. That is much more about inner transformation and a new consciousness. Well, I suppose that means I'm going to have to move on from outrage and anger towards blaming Timothy Omotoso, Nceba Ntelwa, and Becky Taylor, and all the other bad actors in the system, and find my way through to a transformed view and a consciousness that includes and somehow transcends it. What Richard Raw teaches that there's no one-way flight from grievance to gratitude or anger to healing, order to disorder, other than going through grief, tears, and disorder. He then, appropriately, cites Habakkuk as a good example. He writes, "I began this book by saying what I saw in the prophets, a slow but real movement from extended rage and anger, where many of us tire of them, through different forms of holy disorder, to tears and sadness, and then morphing into compassion as their mature response to evil and injustice. A good example is the book of Habakkuk, written about 600 BC. You must endure 3 full chapters of the prophets railing and raging until you get to the final 3 verses, where you can join him in exulting and dancing, with hinds feet in the high places. It seems that once Habakkuk had catalogued the people's wrongdoing and fully appreciated Yahweh's might in coming forth to save your own anointed, he pivoted to praise.
Some scholars call the final 3 verses of Habakkuk's great nevertheless. Though the fig tree does not blossom, and no fruit is on the vines, though the produce of the olive fails, and the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut from the fold, and there is no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. Well, I know I will get there in due course, and I have to be honest to say I'm not there yet. And there have been some wonderful miracles along the way that are restoring my faith. I'm still processing them, and in due course hope to interview someone who is in the thick of this Fort Hare corruption saga, who very paradoxically has helped me enormously. And I'm convinced she is a modern mystic that Richard Raw would want to write a book about. She's been helping me move through that trajectory from grievance, through grief, to gratitude and forgiveness. But in the meantime, Mosilo and all the other wonderful witness bearers who have kept my hope alive, I hope you're going to soon find a better name for me.
Where do we find a love big enough for our outrage and our sorrow? How do we hold our righteous anger? How does it move through the body, express itself, and invite us to weep, stand, speak, and act?
Prophets like Samuel, Jonah, Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel performed an utterly important task. Besides being truth tellers, they were radical change agents, messengers of divine revelation, teachers of a moral alternative, and deconstructors of every new prevailing order.
We are called back to the prophetic tradition, where anger fuels transformation, where grief opens our hearts to solidarity, and where love reminds us that everyone and everything belongs.
Prophets and mystics recognize what most of us do not, that all things have tears and all things deserve tears. They call forth tears more than anger, the tears of everything.